Hello, my name is Joseph Mbele. I teach here at Central Love College in Northfield, Minnesota. I'm a Tanzanian. Before I came here in 1991, I was teaching at the University of Dar es Salaam in Tanzania. I taught there from 1976 in the literature department. And here at Central Love College, I'm in the English department. I teach literatures from around the world, as well as folklore. And I'm also a cultural consultant. I work mostly with Africans and Americans, helping them to navigate cultural differences. I give talks, um, I do presentations, I run workshops um, back in Tanzania and here in the USA. I've published 2 books in the field um, of cultural differences. I have a YouTube channel, I'm on Facebook, I'm on Instagram, those kinds of things. So today, I just want to deliver a message to um, African Americans who are moving to Africa. There is this phenomenon now of a good number of African Americans leaving the USA and going to settle in African countries. We see them going to countries like Gambia and Senegal and Ghana and Rwanda, Tanzania, South Africa. It's not the first time in history that this has happened. If we go back in the history of the slave trade, the transatlantic slave trade, for the hundreds of years, 400 years or so, when Africans were forcibly taken out of Africa and brought to the Americas to be enslaved, whether they came to the Caribbean, Central America, South America, or the USA. From the very beginning, those sentiments of going back to Africa were there. And then with time, there were efforts actually for people to go, especially now we think of the time of Marcus Garvey, about 100 years ago. So this idea of returning to Africa has always been there, either as a dream or as a reality. And so today there is this phenomenon, as I say, African Americans moving to Africa because they are dissatisfied, unhappy, with life in the USA. I have to be clear on this. Some African Americans make the decision to go and live in Africa. We cannot say that, all of them want to go to Africa. This is a complicated question, a complicated issue. There are many who believe this is their country, the United States is their country, and they don't think it's okay, or even meaningful for them to try and go to Africa. But I'm talking about those ones who actually make the decision to go to Africa and are going to Africa. The number one thing I would like to say is that the decision is not an easy one, and it should not be an easy one. It's not a matter of just packing your bags and going to the motherland, as Africa is known. among many of these African American brothers and sisters. It's not as easy as that. You pack your bags here, you go, and you'll be at home over there. Everything will be all right. You'll be among black people. Um, you'll be embraced. You feel at home. This is not the way things work out. And it might not be very easy to stomach this fact, but it is a fact. And so the African Americans who want to go to Africa need to prepare themselves really, really well. Yeah, they put together money. That's one way of preparing. Financial resources, that kind of thing. But I'm talking here about mental preparation, psychological preparation. They really need to prepare themselves mentally and psychologically for the reality of living in Africa. They need to know themselves, to go inwards and understand who they are. And so what I mean here is they may be black, like most of the Africans in Africa. We have the same skin color, but African Americans are Americans. And we need to think about this and the implications of this. African Americans are Americans. It may disappoint some people to be told that, but that is the reality. The hundreds of years they've been in this country, in the USA, they've been brought up in a culture that's different from the African culture. If anybody is in doubt about this, they can look up an essay that James Baldwin wrote. James Baldwin is a very famous African American writer who left the USA and went to live in France in the late 40s. He lived in France many years, and he wrote this essay. I think it's a very important one. It's called The Discovery of What It Means to Be an American. The discovery of what it means to be an American. Basically, he is telling us that living in Europe as a Black American, he discovered he was an American, just like any other American. Now, this is a very strange story, but I think it's a very important one to keep in mind. So, in terms of specifics, let me just say this. African Americans have been brought up in the American culture, which is capitalistic. The values of capitalism are ingrained, in the minds of people who have grown up in this country. For example, they are very much focused on money, how they relate to money that really defines them as Americans, as opposed to the Africans. There was capitalism, there is capitalism in Africa, came with, colonialism, a little bit before colonialism, but I don't think it has transformed completely the African cultures the way, it has transformed the cultures of the Africans who came to be slaves in the USA. African societies continue to be quite communalistic in various ways. They continue to be in some ways. And that marks a big difference between the African Americans and the Africans. This has to be studied, and there are serious implications to it. One of the videos on my YouTube channel is titled Money in African and American Culture. I encourage you to watch that video. So that's one thing, the fact that African Americans brought up in a capitalistic society, and they need to keep this in mind. African Americans are brought up in a racist society. That's another big difference. With the Africans, except perhaps, the Africans of South Africa, the rest of Africa, mostly speaking, and I'm talking about mostly sub-Saharan Africa, they do not really have this same experience with race and racism and things like that. The black people in sub-Saharan Africa, I'm talking about sub-Saharan Africa mostly, they don't even think about the color of their skin. They don't. Notions such as, black, are not really part of their consciousness when they think of themselves. On the other hand, the African Americans, coming from a race-conscious society, they see race much of the time. They look at things from a racial lens, and that's very American. That's very American. But the Africans don't look at things from a racial perspective or with a racial lens. And that can be a problem. So the fact of, you are being black does not carry much weight, does not carry much value in Africa. The Africans don't even think about it. So you're not going to be treated differently because you are black. And then the Africans don't have the same view of white people that African Americans tend to have. They don't. Their experience with white people has been different. Most Africans have very limited experience of white people. And the white people they see in their lives in Africa have been, types like, teachers, doctors, missionaries, volunteers, for example, Peace Corps volunteers. So you find an African growing up in an African village, and his only experience of white people is that Peace Corps volunteer in their village, who is a very popular guy, or that missionary in their village, that doctor in their village. So African Americans moving to Africa will see the Africans there have a very different attitude towards whites. And they tend to have just very positive attitudes towards whites. And this can upset the African Americans whose experience of whites in the USA is different. It seems to me that's a point that needs to be considered very, very carefully. African Americans who have moved to Africa express various sentiments about this. They are disappointed, they think the Africans are, deferring too much to the white people, you know, and that the Africans are not aware of, you know, white supremacy and racism and things like this. It's a complicated issue, but I'm saying, you know, it needs to be considered, and it's not going to be easy for those African Americans who go to Africa. Recognizing that the historical experience of Africans in Africa has been different. Um, this is very important. James Baldwin, the writer I've just mentioned, describes the condition of black people in the USA. And he says to be a black person in the USA is to be in a state of rage most of the time. Rage. Um, and I've quoted him in my little book here. I have a little book, it's called Chickens in the Bus, More Thoughts on Cultural Differences. I've quoted him on page 35. And the rage is that I've quoted him on page 35. And part of the rage is this: it isn't only what is happening to you, but it's what's happening all around you and all the time in the face of the most extraordinary and criminal indifference of most white people in this society and their ignorance. These are the factors that keep African Americans in a state of rage, he says. The indifference of the white people to their predicament. Now, you look at the Africans, you realize they are not in a state of rage for the reasons I've stated here. The experience of white people has been very different, if they have that experience at all. It's very different, in any case, very limited. And in some cases, there's no such experience. They have had no such experience. So you meet these two realities. So imagine what happens when African Americans have to now live with Africans, and they have all these differences, you know, especially around the crucial issue of race. Race consciousness and the perceptions of, you know, what it means to be black, what it means to be white. It's complicated. These are some of the challenges, and I encourage people to actually do a lot of reading before they set out. I've been trying to write, you know, about the differences between Africans and Americans. And in the process, I talk about the specific situation of African Americans when they come to Africa and the tricky situation they find themselves in. Being in a community that's black, but, you know, having to face the reality that it's two different kinds of black people interacting. And there are misunderstandings, there are tensions, but patience, you know, has to be emphasized. I would say that although the challenges are there, those African Americans who want to go to Africa should not hesitate to go. The problems are not insurmountable, and we have many cases of African Americans who have settled quite well. They are still struggling to resolve some issues, but overall they feel it's better for them over there than over here in the USA. Um, I just thought I should say these few words and just highlighting a few problems or issues. Uh, I encourage people to read. There are books, many books. I would mention, for example, a play from Ghana by Ama Ata Aido. It's called The Dilemma of a Ghost. And honestly, um, I would recommend my own books as well. They have been and they continue to be very, very highly recommended by African Americans who are already in Africa. Um, one of them, one of the books is called Africans and Americans Embracing Cultural Differences. And then the sequel is this one here, Chickens in the Bus. Um, yeah, there are people who definitely recommend them very highly, and I definitely, as the writer, recommend them very highly. Um, that's it for today. I hope to create more videos in the future. Bye.